With that, I would like to welcome John Umhoefer. He's the executive director from the Wisconsin Cheesemakers Association, and he's going to be moderating our next panel discussion about the supply chain. So welcome, John.
I'm John Umhoefer. I run the Wisconsin Cheesemakers Association, and I'm really happy to have an expert panel with me today. Just wanted to offer some introductory thoughts. There's nothing more important in the dairy industry than understanding the complexity, the opportunity that lies within this amazing food we call milk, and creating must-have, ready-to-eat foods and ingredients from milk. Nothing's more important. Not milk pricing, not barn construction, not manure management, not even something as important as sustainability. Because if the dairy industry doesn't have products that consumers and food makers are clamoring to buy, then nothing else matters. That fact is at the foundation of the Dairy Innovation Hub and why the recent Dairy Task Force 2.0 in Wisconsin, which set out to build a roadmap for success and profitability in the dairy industry. That's why that task force picked the Dairy Innovation Hub as its highest priority among 51 ideas they gathered. The world's dairy industry has to have innovative, compelling products to sell, products that are better than all the imitators and alternatives, or we have nothing at all. So against that introduction, I've laid the future of the industry on my panelists' shoulders. So I'd like to mention their names and titles and ask them to say a few words of introduction. First, I have Lindsey Ormond. She's the Director of Nutrition and Research for Milk Specialties Global, based in Eden Prairie, Minnesota. Lindsey, can you give us a minute on Milk Specialties and your role at Milk Specialties Global?
Yeah, and thank you for the introduction. No pressure to us, John. And for the opportunity to sit on the panel as well. It's been a really interesting day so far. Milk Specialties Global we are around 75 years old. Our heritage is mainly in animal nutrition, but over the last 12 or so years, our human nutrition business unit has grown exponentially. We process both whey and milk here in the US. So we don't make cheese, but we have a number of partnerships across the US where we then take the whey and milk and we produce a range of dairy ingredients from whey proteins, milk proteins, lactose and permeates, which we then sell globally. We're the largest producer of whey protein isolate in the world. And we sell into a number of key areas. So sports and performance nutrition, the kind of lifestyle and functional nutrition area, and then also a bit into infant and medical nutrition as well. So covering a lot of consumers and a lot of health benefits. And my role at Milk Specialties is really to bring in the science and consumer insights behind dairy ingredients, how these products can fulfill the consumer's nutritional and health needs. And we then use this for which new ingredients we should be producing, and supporting our customers with that as well, which ingredients they should be using, and how they can communicate that. And then also managing any research that we're doing and the research studies that we're funding or involved with.
Okay. I also have today Jeremy Hastings. He's the Director of U.S. Insights for Saputo Dairy USA and works out of their fluid products headquarters in Dallas, Texas. Jeremy, can you unpack the title U.S. Insights Leader and give us a thumbnail on Saputo Dairy?
Absolutely. So first of all, thanks for the opportunity to join this discussion. So Saputo is a global dairy company headquartered in Montreal, Canada. It's about 17,000 employees globally, $15 billion in revenue. Those are Canadian dollars. Everything's reported in Canadian dollars. We are publicly traded in the Toronto Exchange. But as you mentioned, I work for the U.S. division. And in the States, we have about 6,500 employees, 26 manufacturing facilities, a lot of those in Wisconsin, and making a lot of cheese. From a product perspective, we are obviously large in the cheese industry. We're number one in string. I think we're the largest manufacturer of blue cheese as well as goat cheese in the United States. And then on the dairy side, we're a big player in class 2 dairy. So creams and creamers, ice cream mix, and then sour cream and cottage cheese. That's kind of the sweet spot of our portfolio. And my role as director of the consumer insights team is really to understand what are the drivers of consumer demand for food and beverage in general, and then connect those to dairy, and then connect that to our innovation platforms and our new product development process to make sure that we're developing products that consumers want.
Sense. So the point of this whole talk, of course, was to bring that element of what's happening out in industry against the hub. And one of the key players will be the Center for Dairy Research. And of course, they've been a key player in research for about almost 30 years now. I want to introduce Dr. John Lucey, director of the Center for Dairy Research and a professor of food science at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. John, can you give us your elevator speech on the Center for Dairy Research and your role as director?
Well, thank you, John, and good afternoon, everyone. So yes, the center was created in the 1980s in the midst of another crisis in the dairy industry about looking for research or value-added products to return value back to the farmers. And over that period of time, CDR has grown to have just slightly over 40 staff now. And we do a lot of education, so short courses and training, but also a lot of value-added R&D for companies, trial work, pilot plant work, etc. And so, some of the things we've really focused on is on the whey side and milk ingredient side, as well as specialty and commodity cheeses. These are big category areas for us. And some of the things, just to give an insight to maybe groups that are not familiar with CDR, not only do we get involved in graduate student projects, and I guess this is part of the innovation side from your conversation, where we support somewhere between 10 to 15 graduate students a year, either directly or indirectly through the center. And some of them are actually now going to be funded through this hub funding or other College of Ag funding programs. But we also are involved in far-flung things like supporting the U.S. Dairy Export Council in their efforts to sell U.S. ingredients internationally. And that means in a pre-COVID era, staff would be going on overseas visits along with USTEC staff, doing technical seminars and really promoting U.S. dairy ingredients to overseas markets. And that's a very important thing for us, be able to provide that technical background about why you could use these ingredients, what applications would be good. And so we do cover the gamut, as I mentioned, between what I would call education and training, applied research, and then also supporting our export efforts, which is huge in terms of the ingredient side of our business.
Thank you, John. I wanted to say that when I think of this as a panel, I do have focused questions for each of our panelists, but I hope folks on the panel will feel free to jump in and support or deny something that someone else has said. Lindsey, Ormond, I wanted to start on the ingredients side. Let's think of this conversation as the giant area of dairy ingredients, which go into foods or go right into the consumer in the form of, say, a whey protein. And then the finished product side, the cheeses, the butters, the fluid milks. So there's really two big universes here we can talk to, and I'm glad we have these panelists. So, Lindsey, it wasn't too long ago that whey was something that we poured on the ground or fed to pigs. And so I want to break down the talk about ingredients, which I think are sort of the unsung hero of the industry, into where we are now, how we've gotten there here in the last 20 years. And then the next question later will be kind of the future. So can you bring people up to speed on what they might think of as one thing? They might think of a can of whey protein powder at a GNC store, but what's that universe you're operating in? What are the various things you're doing today with dairy ingredients?
Yeah, and I think first off, looking at where we've come from, is research has helped us build the industry that we have and provide the nutritional benefits that we have done over the last, however many decades. From a waste product, and when we're talking about sustainability, I always think it's such a great place to start, is that, we've taken something that we didn't realize the nutritional value and used to dump it, and then we've created something which is pretty special with that. Of course, protein is a biggie with it, and if you look at it from a nutritional benefits perspective or kind of industry perspective for the health side, guess there are 4 kind of key areas. So there's infant nutrition, medical nutrition, sports and performance nutrition, and then the catch-all functional foods term as well. So infant nutrition, of course, breast is best, but it's not always possible. And through research and developments and processing, infant formula manufacturers can now provide formulas that are a lot more sophisticated, and at the end of the day, they support better growth and development versus a standard formula of, say, 20, 30 years ago, which is pretty spectacular. And this can be down to, cognitive development, immune system support, and gut development as well. So there's some great research in that area. Medical nutrition, we heard earlier about PKU nutrition, which is one of the, I just think such a great example of where we've taken the research and provided new opportunities and nutritional support for groups that are really needing it. Also things like optimal nutrition through tube feeding as well, using whey protein hydrolysates, for example, that work well in that format. And then reducing muscle loss during bed rest. So there's a lot in medical nutrition. That's an area which I feel is going to grow as well. Sports nutrition, of course, muscle building is our heritage, and quite rightly with the the high quality protein that you get from dairy proteins, both whey and milk, and the benefit that we see particularly with whey for muscle building, and then the subsequent improvement in performance. And then the kind of catch-all functional foods term, which covers everything else. So whether it's satiety, weight management, bone health, healthy aging, all of these are kind of playing in to what we've seen so far and how we've got to where we are. And then for future, from a health perspective, I think that, again, we saw some really good examples in the previous session on this. And I think what we're going to see is an expansion into new-ish areas for us, or just expanding the research more. So could be blood sugar management, weight control, inflammation, antihypertensive products as well, and also looking at the protein fractions and phospholipid, or it could be phospholipids that are having these benefits as well. No great surprise off the back of a pandemic that the demand for immune function and immune support has skyrocketed as well. And there's some really nice data already in this. So I think those types of what were potentially seen as more niche 10 or 20 years ago, I think are becoming more mainstream, and we'll see more research in those areas. And that's before looking at the application side of things.
I feel like you just mentioned about 20 research directions that any researcher listening to could go. That's good. Yeah, that's good.
I know. Wonderful. And I think that's one of our challenges is, it's one of the great things with having such a big industry and initiatives like Dairy Innovation Hub is that you can play into all of them rather than just having to choose one or two.
So I want to jump into something that was a little further down, but this really takes me to Dr. Lucey, where I believe one question about the hub is it's this collaboration between the universities, which can mean the collaboration from the cow up through the product development up to the consumer. So I don't know, Dr. Lucey, if you feel like this area of ingredients is a place where we can do that integrated research because of the hub, because you got the 3 universities with different expertise. Would you say we can go from cow to consumer on this ingredient side, on this nutritional ingredient side?
I think there's opportunities for it. I think it's all about, there's lots of fertile areas to go in terms of opportunities. But I think integrating farm back to product or ingredient is important. And I think the hub is different from many of the projects that we can do where the Chekhov program doesn't really allow us to get back to the farm level because of the way that program is set up. So the hub will fit a different niche or a different opportunity to do more of the, the more integrated type of projects that are a little bit challenging from just funding constraints. And I think, when I think about future things about ingredients and going back to the farm, we have started a major project with the UW-Medical School that's actually funded by our College of Ag and through the Hatch program, where we're actually looking at farm environment and what components in the farm environment affect either the milk that people are consuming, and how does that affect the actual newborn babies that are being born on farms? Because what what research is actually finding is that children that are born on farms, especially more traditional farms, so we're actually studying a cohort of Amish families at the moment as well, that they have very low incidence of allergies and asthma and other related diseases. But right now we are in the middle of a major project with the medical school to figure out what it is. Is it a component of just the overall farm environment, or is it some component of the milk itself? And if it's something in the milk itself, can we find it and identify it? And that could be a future ingredient. But that's just one example of trying to discover things that could eventually be commercial ingredients. But if we could figure it out, then it could eventually be something we could put into things like infant formula. So I think we need this integrative approach and using the skills and programs across our own campus and across the other campuses as well. So I look at there's lots of opportunity to build on the very positive nutrition message that is there for dairy, in particular on the protein side. I think over the years we've also seen a kind of a pullback from kind of an unfortunate image around the fat side, but I think the dairy message in terms of nutrition has become much more positive now over the last 10 or so years. So I do think a lot of the research is going to have to bridge the health and wellness and the processing side. So I'll give you just an example of on the ingredient side, John, you asked about, we trying to follow the example of whey was a waste product and now we're making all this great things with, but there are other, not as much of a co-products, but there are other co-products like acid whey that comes from Greek yogurt, or there's a high fat fraction that comes out of making these isolate products that are really fed to cattle, really disposed of materials. Can we find value-added uses for them? And they actually do have some very interesting components in them. So there's active research to really break open those components or those fractions, which are waste basically, and find nutritional ingredients like phospholipids and other things from it. So I think there's lots of exciting avenues to go in that will really continue this success story for the dairy industry.
Yeah, it's interesting. Those are byproducts of byproducts. So we can always keep peeling this onion. That is the great product, milk. I want to challenge Lindsey to give us one sneak peek into, if you had to pick one product and maybe something that's fairly consumer understandable, something you're working on at Milk Specialties that's kind of cutting edge, kind of something you're a little bit excited about, might hit the market in the next 5 years, without giving away the farm here.
So the most, I would say the ones which we've, which are, we're kind of finalizing the development of and we've launched this year are both lactoferrin and alpha-lactalbumin. And so they have, I guess their heritage is potentially more in the infant formula area, but there's some nice research in adult nutrition as well. So alpha-lactalbumin, for example, particularly in stressed adults, that it can help to, improve cognitive performance, improve sleep, those types of benefits. And again, off the back of a global pandemic, then these are the types of consumer needs that we're seeing increasing. And with lactoferrin, the research around the immune support and immune function ties in really well at the moment to where we are as a world.
And I have to go one other place with you, and that is, we've got competitors out there. There's other proteins that have risen up in the last few years, pea proteins and soy and almond and macadamia. And I guess I would like your take on that, because not all proteins are the same. And I'm wondering how you feel about that topic. Yeah,
they're not. And I think that, so, we're definitely seeing more coming out. I would say that when you look at the absolute volume, dairy proteins are still the biggest. When you look at plant proteins, and demand is still there for dairy ingredients, it's still growing. When you look at alternative proteins, I should say, soy protein is still the biggest at the moment. The others are creating a lot of noise. And I think maybe that's the perception is that they're potentially a lot bigger than they are. They are going to get bigger. They're getting a lot of investment. So they are going to get bigger for sure. And we need to try and stay one step ahead. The one thing I will say about alternative proteins is that they are raising the overall awareness of the benefit of protein in the diet. And I feel like they're bringing in new consumers to the overall protein category, which I think is a good thing. And then it's our job to educate them on, to tell our story and educate them on the benefits of dairy proteins versus other types of proteins, which we have an initiative going on. For example, the Strong Inside campaign is one that we're running to do exactly that. And as an example of where the investment's going, there's University of Minnesota have the Plant Protein Innovation Center that has had, I think they launched last year, the year before, and so far it's received over $2 million in funding. And that's looking at both the nutritional and health benefits of plant proteins and the technical challenges as well, and to overcome the sensory, the flavoring, the application challenges. So there's, so far, I'd say we're maybe 40 years ahead in terms of research, but they are making the investments. So we need to make sure we stay ahead of it.
Yeah, step ahead to me translates as research dollars. It's going to be a war of R&D, I think, to see who comes out with the most functional and most useful and most nutritional ingredients. So hopefully dairy has a leg up innately. I don't know if you could give me any sense of that. Are they going to have to work hard to make these other proteins get to where dairy gets to more easily because there's more complexity to our array of proteins? Or
it's a good question. I think that when you look at it from a nutritional perspective, you require more overall protein from plant proteins to get the same kind of bang for your buck. So that's one of the basic messages at the moment. And I think, tying into what John was mentioning, and then also the presentations that we saw earlier, things like bioactive peptides, the protein fractions, the phospholipids. I feel like this is an area where we are, we're probably ahead of them in that, but not to say that they can't make the discoveries and catch up as well. So I feel like us going into more of those fractions and the peptides area helps us to differentiate and bring in other consumers as well.
Sure, we've got more byproducts and byproducts that all have value. I
Exactly.
do so little time, so much to talk about. I'd like to shift over to Jeremy Hastings from Saputo, and on that side of the universe is the finished dairy products, and that's the cheeses that they have, and the vast array of class 2 and class 1 fluid milk and spoonable products in dairy. So Jeremy, I'm wondering if you can tell me what areas Saputo's looking at for trends that consumers are telling you are what they want next, and how that's going to drive your R&D. What are the trends you're seeing at the consumer level right now, and perhaps a longer term look?
Yeah, thanks. That's a big question, and there's a lot that we try to keep track of. This has been an interesting year, right? I think there's some longer term trends that continue to have tailwinds that we want to keep our eye on, and then there's some kind of COVID related trends that are maybe more short term in nature. So we're trying to kind of keep those separate. And then there's a third group that I think are sort of started in the COVID era and will continue to evolve. So, an example of one of those would be what's going on in the deli section of a retail grocery store, right? This concept of someone standing behind the glass and touching your cheese and weighing it and measuring it, and you've got to wait 7 minutes, and there's just all kinds of problems with that. One of the trends we're seeing have a lot of success is a pre-cut, pre-weighed, pre-packaged deli cheese option that still looks like you got it from the deli, and you did. It's still merchandised there, but it doesn't require the store labor. It doesn't require the touching of the product. So that's one thing that we think we'll continue to see more of, and then some of the retailers that have implemented those programs are having some success with that. Some of the COVID trends that might be a little more short-term in nature. I wish I could tell you class 1 conventional white milk is going to continue the growth we saw in the spring. I hate to say it, but I think eventually that probably returns to a trajectory that we're more used to seeing. And on the cheese, staying on the cheese side again, something like larger pack sizes. I mentioned we do a lot of string cheese. The 36 count pack size has really shown a lot of growth this year. I think, as we get back to whatever the new normal is, it'll be interesting to see if that trend kind of continues. But in terms of the broader trends, this concept of immunity fits into a broader concept of just functional food, and just this concept that consumers want. Yes, it has to taste good, but consumers want it to do something for them and increase their whether it's their energy or their focus or whatever it might be. That's not going away. Protein's a big player in that. Obviously, that's what we've been talking a lot about on this call already. So that's one that I think continues to have a lot of demand behind it. And we see that in the fluid side with ultra-filtered milk. So something like a Fairlife, that has been very successful in the marketplace. And I think that will continue to drive growth on the fluid side. I think higher fat, we mentioned, fat used to have a bad name attached to it. That's not the case anymore. Whipping cream has been not just double-digit growth, but in the 20s and 30s, percentage-wise and year-over-year volume growth for the last 5-6 years. So people are finding new usage occasions for it as a coffee creamer, baking at home, scratch cooking, those kinds of trends. We think that probably continues. So there's a lot to unpack. There's one thing that I think is very interesting that particularly when it comes to partnering with folks outside of industry to really understand is this concept of a DNA diet. And I don't know how broadly this is known or people know about this, but there's and I don't know that it's really a trend yet, but it's definitely a thing where you take a DNA sample and there are companies out there who will match your DNA to biomarkers in foods and sort of curate what's considered a highly personalized, optimized diet for your DNA profile. And dairy is certainly part of that, recommended output. And so the big open question we have is, okay, so if millions of people start taking these tests, what is it going to say about the types of dairy they should be eating, and what are those categories, and how does that shift the trajectory of the demand curve for dairy with consumers? So early stages of that trend, but something we're keeping an eye on and trying to understand.
Jeremy, do you think there'll be a way to tap into that knowledge, or is that going to be closely guarded or sent only back to the consumer, or do you think you'll be able to grab that knowledge as it comes out?
I'd love to have access to what that looks like in aggregate. I personally have taken 4 of these tests just because I'm curious and I feel like it's part of my job to understand, well, what is this output telling me? But it's a great question. At this point, I don't have the answer.
So you're seeing
Can I ask a question on that?
Sure.
How aligned were the different tests if you've done 4? Were they all totally different, or were they reasonably aligned?
They were different. They were different. The good news is I'm not lactose intolerant. That was clear. But in terms of the types of dairy that they recommended, and this is where it starts to get concerning, is they did recommend some certain plant-based dairies. So things like almond milk, oat milk was too new. I don't know if that's going to start popping up in some of these results. That's the kind of thing I think we need to understand as an industry as people are taking these kinds of tests, because that's very compelling to a consumer. I mean, what's more compelling than something tailored to your own DNA profile and kind of understanding what that is going to tell people.
Hopefully we flag this for DMI to get on their radar so that dairy keeps up in this area. I want to swing over and not miss the chance to talk to Dr. Lucey in the same area, because they've done a lot of really hands-on R&D work on the cheese side, if not other dairy products. In fact, they're bringing in aseptic, I know, into the new Center for Dairy Research that will pop up next year in Madison. But John, I don't know if you have anything you'd like to add on what you've done to help cheese take its journey from where the industry was 20 years ago to now, and convenience falls in that path. The functionality of mozzarella falls in that path. A lot of things that have come out in industry, I think, started at the university level. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think here in the Midwest and around Wisconsin, a lot of innovations have come out over the years. I mean, products like string cheese, barrel cheese, even the low moisture part skim that we're actually so familiar with right now. That type of product really originated in this region as it stands right now, versus the kind of water buffalo mozzarella that was in Italy from grandparents' time ago. So there has been an engine here, particularly in the Midwest, that has really driven some of the major cheeses that we're talking about now. Things that we're working on, a couple of things just just to highlight. And it was very appropriate this year with the COVID situation and the loss of food service, kind of sudden loss of food service, which is probably, maybe around 30% or something like that of cheese sales go in there. But maybe it's even higher when you aggregate other fractions of cheese that go into food service. So that was a big shock. We've been studying techniques to extend the shelf life of your normal everyday cheeses, like your Mott's. And really, this was all around an overall strategy to allow cheeses made here in the US to be exported to the world, where you would have to incorporate much longer shipping time and distribution time. So for example, all I can tell you is for your standard low moisture part skim Mott's, which is, so commonly used in things like pizza, the typical shelf life for that was like 2 months, maybe, depending who made it. But we could get that up to between 9 to 12 months and have good functionality and shelf life by various technologies. So we were working on a range of cheeses and testing them out to see how we could extend their shelf life. But that became very appropriate, and we were really inundated by lots of requests from cheese companies when the shutdown of the food service sector happened this spring, because they could make products and keep them for the markets to start to recover in a number of months. And if they didn't use some of these new technologies, the products would already be past their best shelf life date. So we put on a webinar, for example, just on this whole topic of new technologies or approaches to extend shelf life. And we had over 300 attendees at it from all across the US. And actually, we had international attendees as well. So I do think that looking for technologies, whether that's high pressure or new types of cookers and other devices, to treat our cheeses, to change its functionality and also extend its shelf life, is going to help us get into new markets. And I think some of it is going to be, how do we sell to the world versus just sell to the US? Because there's a big market out there. And, we see that the growing trends originally in some of these Asian countries and so on is through products like pizza. And it's an opportunity for us to get our products in there. So I do think that's an important category. And we at the university focus more on technology unlocks, techniques that people could start to use to make those changes. But we are working on some other kind of what I would call kind of strange and goofy kind of technologies, which is good because that's what the university should do. How to make cheese directly from powder, directly without going through a reconstitution step. I would call it like designer powders. And so we are looking at going back and looking at recombined cheeses, which really were like taking regular milk powders and blending them together and see what you got. We are working on designing milk powders so that you could take these powders to an overseas market and have them recombine it back to a cheese that they desired. So that kind of product is something I could think we could see in the not too distant future. We're also looking at how to, there's a whole, cheese is often used as a snack, and string cheese we were just talking about, but there's a whole snack category that's not in the dairy shelf or in refrigerated storage. It's general snacks that are out there. So we have research going on how to use cheese or dairy much more into a snack-like product through extrusion and other technologies. So I think we have to keep looking for ways to find new places that cheese could end up on. We've obviously done a great job over the last 50 years in finding all sorts of places to put cheese in, but I think finding new markets through technology and our innovations is important.
So John, I only got a minute left tonight. That area you're talking about, kind of the way outside the box, which ends up being, standard 20 years from now, is great. And so I wanted to close with asking Jeremy, and I'll start with Lindsey though. What is it that you see is the role of the university in your work? Do you read a journal, and do you see sparks in there for your company? Is it, because I'm trying to bring it back to the hub being a university-based program?
Yeah, and so as a company, we don't have millions of dollars to spend on research. And this type of initiative, this pre-competitive initiative, is really critical for us, because this is exactly the type of research that we then use for our innovation and for also highlighting it to our customers. I mean, our I guess there are two types of customers for us. It's our, it's the manufacturers, the brands, but we need to sell into them for the benefits. Why is this going to work for them, but why is this going to work for the end consumer as well? So this type of research is really critical. I mean, we need to, it's really future proofing. I think it's future proofing dairy, because we need to expand out past, just fluid milk or just cheese. And the way that consumers are interacting with dairy, the dairy category is changing, and we need to evolve with that. So that's exactly how, we utilize this research to help push us forward.
So Jeremy, I'm sure Saputo in the broadest sense also looks to what's happening at the research level. I don't know if you read the Journal of Dairy Science, but perhaps someone in the company is. I don't know if you have a sense of, are you looking at consumers research in addition to the technical research, or how does Saputo approach that?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, I don't have a copy of that journal, so I'll have to look that up. I'm assuming someone at Saputo is reading that in great detail. I would describe our approach with university collaboration as really more on the technical side. We've got certain partnerships throughout the country and also the world. Our R&D actually in the UK is actually housed at a university. I think the team is actually based on site there. So that's my understanding of kind of traditionally how it's worked at Saputo. But I like what Lindsey said about some of the pre-competitive issues that really face us as an industry that we all need to understand well, and in order to create products that will have relevance and maintain our market shares and consumer demand for the end goods that we all want to see. I'll bring up the DNA diet thing again. I mean, I feel like that's a great example of something that at a university level we could be looking at.
Yeah, that's a good point. I had a closing question too that gets to, and I want honest answers from people, because I know we're in a revolution, because I know where the industry was when I took the job 28 years ago. But, and I'll start again with Lindsey. Have we flowered as to the opportunities for dairy ingredients? Are we in the middle of a revolution, or is there so much ahead of us that we can't imagine yet? Where are we in that sort of growth of mind expansion and what we can do with dairy and what we can do with milk?
Really good question. I feel like we're at the tip of the iceberg, to be honest with you.
Really?
I think when you look at we probably don't know, or we probably only know a fraction of the bioactive peptides, the benefits that they have, the phospholipids and the benefits of those. And I feel like there are so many other consumer groups that some of it we have some research studies on them, but it's just that we need to expand that area, and particularly to take it to the consumer and tell the consumer the story and the benefits. So I feel like we're at the tip of the iceberg. I feel like there's a lot ahead of us, which is a lot of exciting ahead of us as well, which is great. So yeah, it's kind of picking the direction is sometimes the challenge, right?
Well, thank goodness we've got farmer-funded research, and now we've got this hub-funded research. It really does help us move in more than one direction, which is important. Jeremy, I wonder if Saputo is ever looking at new ingredients, new products, or you're kind of holding the course these days, or do you see it too as a widening pipeline from Saputo?
It's a widening pipeline. I mean, again, it all goes back to consumer demand, right? And what are consumers looking for? They want a lot, and it's widely functional in nature, and we've got to keep a pace with what's happening in the marketplace and around the world. I think there's tons of opportunity for dairy, particularly globally, certainly in the developing world. But no, we've got to keep an open mind and a wide net and to stay relevant.
I think I'll throw that to John for our closing comment. John, Lucey, similar comment, and you touched on how you guys are thinking way outside the box, but with the new center, you've actually got new equipment, you've got new opportunity to look at things, you've got new ripening rooms and new aseptic. And I wonder if you could give us a minute, Dr. Lucey, on the opportunities for widening that pipeline of future dairy products because of what we've got here in the hub's arsenal. We've got this new building coming on, and frankly, a new building coming on at River Falls. And even there's the gleam of a dairy pilot plant talked about in Platteville. So Tell us about Madison a little bit, John.
Yeah, and just to come back to the last point first, John, how do we get research information? You give the example of Journal of Dairy Science to companies, and actually that's something we actively are involved in. So every year we do a research forum where we bring the graduate students all across campus that are working on dairy and showcase it to companies, including the two companies that are on here today, and technical people and R&D folks. Last year, and I know you've popped in occasionally to those meetings as well, we had over 100 R&D folks from across the US industry attend to hear a whole day of graduate students talking about all of their dairy research, whether it's safety or nutrition or ingredients or cheese or whatever. So we feel it's our mission to really try and bridge that gap. We know that the companies will not sit down and write and read some of these academic journals. So I tell you, we find it important to get that information out there as quick as possible in some sort of fashion that they can start to take notice of it. But back to your question about are we in the middle of a flattening curve, or is it an exciting sharp upward curve? I would say that the possibilities are there for us to keep rising and growing. I don't really worry too much about the plant and other proteins. We've had soy forever, and we're having a lot of newbies. But I think if we focus on innovation and we focus on the attributes that are very highly competitive about dairy, we'll be fine. It'll just be a bigger marketplace with more of these others in there. So what do we need to do to keep going? I think from our side, the things we can do is, as you say, use the new facility to help people who want to try new processes to make things, or new ingredients, or new cheeses. And to do that, we're including a brand new spray dryer with a lot of range of capability to make these powdered ingredients and fractionated ingredients, and specialty cheese, 9 caves to do every kind of specialty tea under the sun. So, I mean, we see our role as a facilitator in providing resources to the industry to work with us to create these new things, and then eventually make them at small scale. And if the consumers like them and they meet expectations, they will be scaled up by the companies themselves.
Mm-hmm. Now, I haven't mentioned it to the audience, but please feel free to chat us a question. And if not, I wanted to touch on one area where we keep hearing from each panelist independently that there's global opportunity here. And that too was not such a big thing when you look into the 90s, when we were so new to the international market as a country. But now, especially on the ingredients side, but more and more on the cheese side, we are a global industry in the United States, looking and growing, selling 15 to 16 to 17% of our milk overseas every year. And I think I heard a Milk Specialties number, a significant amount of ingredients, upwards of 30% travel overseas from all the companies in the industry. No trade secret there. But I guess we're hearing it from John too, about one of the things people forget about on the export side is shelf life. You can't just talk about sending great cheese overseas, because by the time it gets there, it's about halfway ready to say sell by this date. It's about half done. So there is a very technical side to export, and there's the marketing side. Both are tricky, but it's good to hear we've got research happening at the university. And I know that a lot of the things in infant formula end up being huge opportunities in the Asian markets. So I guess if there's any closing thoughts on the global nature of where we've come in dairy, and perhaps what CDR is doing in that export realm, it sounds like a lot of your research really focuses on export.
Yeah, John, I just want to make one comment. There is even a lot of planning discussions going on right now between DMI and some of the other regional, as well as CDR, and through the Dairy Business Innovation Alliance, which you're a partner of, which is really to try and grow the dairy industry here in the Midwest, another type of initiative. One of the key strategies within that program is exports and understanding consumers in overseas markets for things like cheese. So we then can take that insights and actually start to work on products and prototypes, etc., that will meet these consumer demands. So I think here in the US, cheese for export hasn't been a big thing. We keep working on research for it, but some companies are grasping those opportunities. And I think over the next 5 to 10 years, you'll see a lot more of them do so. And some of it was economics about whether the price was right to really do this. But I think it's becoming more in sync now. And I think we were seeing more US manufacturers get focused on it. It was always historically for powders, but not so much on the cheese side.
Yeah, those are the pillars for me. It's the R&D and it's the overseas opportunities. And then they come together in places like the hub funding we have here. So I think we've hit our mark. It's 1:15. I'm going to pass it back to Maria, but I really want to thank our panelists for offering their time today in a very candid and I think interesting conversation. Thank you very much.
And thank you to John and the 3 panelists. Really, really informative discussion. And thank you to all of you tuning in at home and taking the time to make us part of your day.